Hey everybody, welcome back. I had planned to make some cereal balls today, which I did make a few, and then I realized the clay balls that I have are a little bit stiffer than I prefer for making cereal balls. So I thought, how could I better utilize this stiff clay? And I thought, well, I'll just make some 1-pound vases, and then later I'll make some soft clay or use some softer clay to make the cereal balls. So we're gonna make some 1-pound vases and have a little chat. So let's go. Alright, so here we are going to make some 1-pound vases, and I don't know how many I'll make. I'll probably just make them till I get tired of making 1-pound vases, which will probably happen before I run out of clay balls. But it's something that I know I can make that will most likely sell, which is a good thing. It's a good thing to keep in mind if you're making pottery with the intent to sell it. If you're just doing it as a hobby and it doesn't matter to you whether you sell it or not, then you don't really need to think about that. But if you're making pottery with the intent to sell it as part of your living, or just because you'd like to make some extra money, you do need to keep in mind at times things that you know you can make that will sell, or most likely will sell. We never know for sure. Unless you have orders for something, then you know what will sell, of course, because it's already sold basically when you're making it. But this is something that I don't normally make. I make some 1/2-pound vases, and those usually sell really well. I don't normally make 1-pound vases, but it's something that I'm pretty sure I can sell, and at a pretty good price point for what it is. I do like making smaller vases. One of the advantages that I think I have in making smaller vases is that I can play around with shapes and ideas that are in my head that I may be able to then use later on larger pieces. Of course, a lot easier to mold and to form a 1-pound clay ball than it is, 5 or 6 or even more than that. So it's nice to kind of play around and see what kind of shapes come out of the clay balls at this stage. At times I won't have a certain shape that I want to make in mind. I have certain shapes that I like, and I usually kind of go along those lines. But sometimes I just start pushing on the clay in a certain area, and then I look to see what I like out of what I see, and then what I can work with it. And sometimes I'll do the shape of a bottom like this, and then I'll come back and start closing in the top and just kind of see what I like out of the shape of it. And at times too, you can see there it buckled a little bit. It got out of center just a little bit as I was throwing it, and so at times it'll limit me based on what shape I'm gonna. At times I'll be limited to what shape I'm gonna make based on how centered the clay ball and how well pulled it is. Because at times if it's got a little bit of a wobble in it like that, then you're not going to be able to pull in that neck as tight as if it was perfectly centered and running true. Just because it'll be a lot harder, a lot more of a challenge, and it probably won't end up looking as nice. So I'll just pull it in a little bit and leave it more of an open form, and just make it easier on myself, and it'll make the end product look better as well. So I don't push it, more than I have to, especially because I've got a lot of clay balls sitting over here. I don't have to push it. It's not like I have to make a certain shape or a certain form. So I'll just kind of leave that one as a little bit more of an open form. I might play around and fluke the top of this a little bit when I get done, just to give me some variety. Because if I'm going to make a bunch of small vases, I'm not making them for wholesale. I'm not making them for a gallery that's requesting a certain shape. So I'm not going to be tied down to a certain shape that I feel like I need to make. Although I've done that, and I did that for most of my career in pottery. I worked for other pottery studios where they would show me one pot and I had to make 50 or 100 of those, or 20 or 200, whatever it was, of that one shape before I would make anything else. So I've paid my dues. I've made probably, no joke, I've probably made 500,000 or more pots in my career so far. So I don't feel bad now that I'm gonna make a bunch of random shapes based on this is just what I feel like making at the moment. Because I know that to me it's not a cop-out, you know. At times we can do that to ourselves. We can think, oh, well, I didn't really want to make them the same anyway, so I'm just going to make them all random. Well, if that's truly what you mean, then that's fine. But, you know, if you're giving yourself a cop-out and be like, well, I didn't want to make all the cups look the same anyways, then, you know, that's one thing. But I feel like I've paid my dues, and actually I do throw a lot of my coffee mugs to look the same, and I throw them to a gauge because I've done it for years, and it's actually a little quicker for me to do it that way. And I think that way if somebody does want to buy a pair of coffee mugs, they can buy two that are pretty similar. They're never going to be identical, of course, but I can make them pretty close to identical now. But when it comes to vases, I just like throwing whatever happens. Like I said, I've got certain things in mind that I like to make, and I kind of roll with those and then make changes as I go along. I do throw a lot of my larger vases while sitting down. It's something I might make a video on eventually, the advantages that I've found from standing throwing versus sitting. I spent most of my career just standing, throwing pots while standing up, and I still like to do that. I think there's advantages and disadvantages to both. And I think in the future I will make a video about that, because that's something that I've thought about quite a bit. And something that honestly I didn't start throwing sitting down until probably 5 or 6 years ago. Out of my 25 years, that's quite a long time, you know, doing it one way. But I started to see some advantages when I tried it sitting down. And I thought, you know what? And most of that advantage was just having leverage over the piece. By being more stable and while I was sitting. But we'll save that conversation for that video. Mostly what I look for in my vases is just really a fluid shape that's balanced. You know, I'm sure there are things in my mind that I'm impressed by that I've seen other potters make that come out as I'm making pieces, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think, you know, if we're inspired by something that we see, you know, and we lean that way in one way or another, as long as we're not like sitting there trying to perfectly copy somebody else. Honestly, I think it's a compliment. If somebody sees my work and they end up making work that's similar to mine, just because they were so inspired by it, to me, that's a compliment, because that means that the work I made was well enough that it was in their mind and inspired them to the point that it was so in their mind that when they started throwing, that look and shape came out through their hands. One of the challenges I think a lot of people have in making any vase or any form is really putting a smaller neck on a piece, and we'll talk about that as I make my next one. But one of the initial things I'll tell you is leaving enough clay in the top part of the vase where you're gonna close in that neck, and also not getting the form too wide as you're pulling the straight cylinder to start with. There are two big things that will help with that. Leaving, like I said, leaving a little extra clay in that top where you want to neck it in, and also pulling the form as skinny as you can. But also I would say that centering the clay ball really, really well is another way to do that. Make sure you don't pull it out of center as you're pulling it. So I guess there's three main tips that I would say: centering it really well, pulling a narrow cylinder, and then leaving some extra clay in the top where you want to neck that in. But we'll go through that as I make another one. So of course the challenge of working with stiffer clay is that it's harder to center, but once you do get it centered, it's harder to knock out of center as you're pulling and as you're working with the clay. So it's a little bit more of a struggle at the front end, but then it's a little easier to work with on the back end. So once you get the clay ball really good and centered, which is good for any shape, but there are shapes that you can get away with not centering it as well, more than you can for something if you're wanting to close in the top of like a vase like we're talking about here. So of course I'm going to start by opening the clay ball up and then doing my first pull like I do there. Before I do my first inside and outside pull like this, I'm going to go ahead and clean all the excess water out of the inside, and then I just add a little bit to the top, and then that goes down in a little bit on the inside, and then I wet the outside and keep the sponge in my hand as I pull. This is basically going to help so that when I'm done pulling the cylinder, I don't have to reach my hand back down in there and clean the water out of the inside. You could do it with a sponge on a stick, and there's nothing against that. It's a great idea. I just try to keep as few tools to my side as possible and as few motions. That's probably from my years of being a production potter. But you can see how I left a little bit of clay. Really, when I pulled, I followed through with the motion on this top part, but I didn't really pull any extra clay in that top portion. Now I'm going to start by kind of doing that same shape that was on that last one. I'm going to go in at the bottom and then back out, and then I'm going to close in the top, or neck in the top. Whoa! We about lost it there. I about pushed a little too hard. Ah, there we go. I don't think I can fix that one. Nope. There you go. Hey, either a blooper reel or we'll leave that in and you guys can know that I'm human. Pushed a little too hard. Alright, we'll just leave that in there for you guys. So if you made it this far in the video, that's a bonus for you. And thankfully I can say that that does not happen very often. Not that it didn't happen a lot when I was beginning. Of course it happens to everybody, but thankfully now I don't really have that many pieces that I lose while throwing. I'll probably break more pieces in the rest of the process than I lose while I'm throwing. But anyway, so now we're going to get quickly back here to where I was before I lost that last one, and talk through the rest of the steps here. All right, let's see if we can do this one without tearing it in half. All right, we're gonna push in down at the bottom, but not as much as I did last time. It's got a weak spot there already that I noticed while I was pulling it, so I'm definitely gonna be a little extra careful. push that in and then have that belly come out and curve that around. I'm going to finish that shape because then I'm going to close in the top and finish the top part of that shape after I close it in. I'm going to go ahead and make the foot on the bottom before I do the top as well. And now I'm just going to add water to the top portion of the outside of the top there with my sponge, and then I'm going to close this in. Kind of wrap my left hand around that neck. You can see it had a little bit of a weak spot there as well that started to buckle as I was pulling that in. I'm going to try to smooth that out so you can't see that. Have to put some extra thick glaze up there to cover that little ripple there. See if I can pull through that ripple as well. If I can do that, that'll help hide it as well. It's funny, it was kind of a weak spot in the clay, or kind of a different, wasn't necessarily too thin, because otherwise it would have buckled, but it kind of just rippled a little bit. But either way, we'll work with it. I'm going to cut that top off one more time, even it back up. And that ripple is still there, but like I said, I'll maybe try some thicker glaze up there to hide that when I glaze this one. Well, neither one of those last two were my favorites by any stretch of the imagination. The one's in a pile over here on the wheel, and the other one is not the best shape and has that little ripple on the top, but we're gonna roll with it anyways. We'll make a couple more here on camera. We'll try to do one more, maybe one more with that skinny top, and then maybe a different shape, and we'll end it there. One of the things that I think helps a lot with making vases like this also is I control the speed of the wheel with my foot. Not everybody does that, but I think that's, for me, that's one advantage that I like, is that I can adjust the speed as I'm pulling if I need to. Faster or slower sometimes will make the difference between continuing a good pull or not, because if I had to stop in the middle of a pull to adjust the speed of the wheel, that would kind of break up my fluid motion that is really helping me make the shape I want. This one's a little bit thinner right in there, so I'm having to take it easy, closing that in. I can feel it right in that neck area there where you're trying to close that in. I can feel one of the things that I do to help with that is do it a little slower. Keep the top even by cutting it off. and also choke it in a little bit, and then I come back and around this shoulder a little bit, because if you get a sharp edge on that shoulder, that's going to cause it to collapse more easily. Also, it's going to help with the finished shape if I keep that shoulder rounded, if that's the goal of what I'm looking for. If I keep it rounded as I'm going, that's going to help me in the long run as well. Keep some water on there, but try not to put too much. Of course, having the stiffer clay is going to help by allowing you to have more water on there before it gets too soft to work with. Something in the clay there. Alright, I think we got it there. Got what I wanted. Even with it being a little thinner right up there. Still got a little bit of a ripple there as well from it being thinner. Yep, not something I really like right there, but hey, nobody's perfect, and I believe with the glaze that I put on that, I can cover most of that, because the overall form is still very nice. All right, for this last one, at least for the video that I'm going to talk through, I'm going to just try to do something a little bit more bulbous on the bottom, maybe still with a skinnier neck. But in order to accomplish that, I'm actually going to try to pull it that way to begin with. So on my second pull here, I'm actually going to take from the bottom and pull out. And then back in to try to start the shape that I want as I'm pulling it. Something that I definitely think is beneficial, if you can get used to doing, is as you're pulling a piece, if you're wanting to go especially wide or even small, if you could pull the clay in the direction that you're wanting to ultimately go and shape a little bit while you're pulling, you're going to give yourself the benefit of going in that direction to begin with. Give myself a nice fat round belly there on that piece, and then work on bringing this top in a bit as well. Good thing is, if it gets a little uneven, I try to pull that up to the top, cut that off, and then start back with closing the neck in and pulling. But if you can pull that unevenness to the top there and cut it off, you'll help yourself out a lot. Even though it's a little uneven on top, I'm going to leave it because I like the thickness that's up there right now. And I think once I stop the wheel, you won't really notice that little bit of unevenness that's in the top there. I like the thickness that's up there right now, so I don't want to mess with that. There we go. Alright guys, there you go, 1 pound vases along with some conversation, including tips of what I think would help anybody throw any pot really, but especially these 1 pound vases. And I've got some more clay balls left. I haven't decided. I might switch back to cereal balls. I'm about done on my small vases limit. So anyway, we'll leave it at that. Thank you guys for being here as always, and thank you for all the support on all the videos. And yeah, hope you have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video. See you. Bye.